A heads up for this episode, we're going to discuss some heavy themes as part of George's story, such as drugs, addiction and rehab, homophobia, HIV and AIDS, mental health, childhood trauma, postpartum depression, xenophobia and police entrapment. There will be resources in the show notes for you to check out if you're affected by any of the issues we discussed today.
Hello and welcome to Empathy for the Devil. I'm Sam Parker.
I'm Matt Thomas.
I'm Chula Gunawardena.
In every episode, we're going to be diving into the lives of individuals in the spotlight who left us too soon, but may still face harsh judgments for how they lived, what they became, or how they died.
Join us as we peel back the layers of their stories with empathy and understanding, exploring their journeys from mortals to myths from a modern mental health perspective, aiming to understand the person behind the legend.
We want to bring empathy to the misunderstood, misjudged, or even demonised. Empathy for the devil. So, George Michael, if you need reminding, which I'm assuming you don't, otherwise we wouldn't be friends, one half of 80s pop duo Wham with his best mate Andrew Ridgeley, who they met at school. Singles, oh my goodness, Last Christmas, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, Young Guns, Go For It. I was an absolute fan. And for the listeners, he led a very human life, albeit in public. And as you know, guys, you know, a lot of people that we deal with in the music industry, sport, entertainment, actually what it comes down to is about the struggles of being human.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And Sam, why did you choose George Michael in particular?
Well, how can I put it? When I was a pre-teen / teenager, I was 12 years old. I was in Bromley in Kent, suburbs, which George was as well, incidentally. And when I first saw and heard Young Guns, I think it just fucking blew my mind. He and Andrew were so gorgeous. Everyone at school went absolutely fucking mad for them. The Make It Big tour, and when they played at Wembley, I think it was in 1984, that was the first ever gig I went to.
I remember getting into Wham because my first ever girlfriend liked them, and I was jealous of George Michael, so I pretended to like them and became a bigger fan than she was.
Well, I remember all the girls were crazy about those Smash It cards with George Michael on them, and I made sure I got a few of those.
Did you?
Yeah, just
in the back pocket.
Yeah,
save them for later. Pull them out now. Never know, Julie, where it might get you. George and Andrew were from the London suburbs, and so was I. There was a general feeling of being a big fish in a little pond, I think. A bit of a swagger, a bit of an all right geezer, but don't take the piss, you know, and I kind of really identified with that. But also what I loved about him, that he was really super smart and funny. And so I liked his swag, I liked the vibe, I loved the looks, and the fucking pop songs were absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So before we go on, I just wanted to... I don't know, it might be interesting for people to hear a little bit about why I do what I do. There was definitely a sense when I was a kid in the suburbs, and, you know, my dad's a carpenter, my mum's a hairdresser, that when I saw, I don't know, pop music artists like George Michael, you know, I just looked at that world and just thought it looked incredible. It looked like, I don't know, like it was just such a... You know, I suppose it's the bright lights, big city, but it was this treasure trove. It was so sparkly and fun and colourful and exciting. And I remember thinking, I want to do a job like that. I want to do a job where that is my environment. And that's, you know, it was just so appealing and attractive. And in fact, I do remember, I think I was about 15 and I was around my auntie's house and she said, oh, what do you want to do when you're older? And I said, oh, I don't know. I think I want to work in the music industry and help people, which is so weird, isn't it?
Wow.
Because that's exactly what I ended up doing. And she said to me, well, why don't you work in the music industry first and then you can help people?
Huh.
which is what you've done.
Which is what I've done.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I never knew that about you.
Did you not?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You are right, old Nostradamus you were.
I was Nostradamus.
Yeah.
Nostradamus. So now let's jump into the story. So I wanted to start at the very beginning. George Michael was actually born Georgios Yog Panayiotou. And I've probably pronounced that wrong, but I did my best. Please forgive me, George. On June 25th, 1963, in East Finchley, North London. His father was a Greek Cypriot restaurateur and his mum was a dancer, I believe. He had 2 older sisters. He was the youngest boy. There was tragedy from the very beginning, actually. That's what struck me with this story. His uncle, his mother's brother, who he learned through one of his songs, actually, My Mother Had a Brother, died by suicide on the day he was born.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I guess what I was thinking about was the effect it might have had on his mum.
Yeah.
Well, of course, not might have had, would have had. It was a brother. And I guess as a mum, and I'm just thinking about, you know, the early times with my newborn, it is so hard. Those of you with kids will know, you know, those first couple of months are crazy. And you feel like shit and you've just given birth and you don't know where, you know, your arse from your elbow. And the idea of having to deal with something so shocking and horrifying, I really feel for her, actually. But I guess what I was wondering, and maybe I'll address this to you, Chula, first, is what sort of effect can it have on a infant child when something so awful happens to its mother?
She would have been in an internal conflict, like emotionally. On the one hand, she's overjoyed because she's just had this lovely baby and then she's lost her brother at the same time. And I imagine she would want to give everything that she could to her baby and therefore would be suppressing any grief that she might felt. And the problem is, as we all know, with suppressed emotions, they need somewhere to go. And also it would be difficult for her to be completely detached from those feelings and be 100% present for George. So it would have been really difficult. And I imagine there would be some attachment issues that might follow.
What would you imagine in terms of that experience might have affected attachment style? Or maybe you want to tell us about attachment styles in the first instance, actually.
In terms of attachment, I think the important thing or the simplistic way of looking at it is that you can have secure or insecure attachments. And that is dependent on how we're parented. And I imagine that he would have developed an insecure attachment style to some degree because of that experience and because of not getting the full attention and connection from his mother.
I remember actually when one of my daughters was born, my uncle died on exactly the same day. And I remember, it's obviously not the same situation, but I remember feelings of intense guilt that I was going through this wonderful, wonderful time and my dad had just lost his brother. And so I almost felt guilty for having this beautiful moment and this brand new baby. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if any of that might have been happening for George's mother.
Yeah, absolutely. It's completely likely that that's the case.
There's this idea of the mother's gaze, isn't there? You know, as you know, baby arms and the baby looks back and, you know, the mother reflects back and, you know, when we look into babies' faces, we kind of mirror them, don't we? Or we end up making funny faces. It's a real kind of instinctive interaction, isn't it, with newborns? Yeah.
And that's something really significant for me because my mum went blind when I was 4 and that gaze, that connection between the two of us was broken. And I didn't really understand what kind of an impact that had on me, but all the work I've done in rehab and therapy has taught me that it was very significant.
God, yeah. How did you connect with her if you couldn't see each other?
I made lots of noise.
Did you?
That explains everything.
The drums.
It does, the drums.
The drums.
Got it, of course. Heavy metal.
And speaking of the attachment, I mean, even though obviously there was the pairing with Andrew Ridgeley, George Michael, for me, always came across as a bit of a loner. Like that he maybe struggled with attachment and, you know, it would make a lot of sense.
It's funny, actually, because I was just thinking about how that might have played out. But you're thinking insecure attachment, which would be clingy. Clingy?
It could be. It could be clingy. It could be ambivalent. It could be avoidant. I would have to have him in the chair to really figure that out.
Get him in the chair. It's a shame we can't have him in the chair.
There's a lot. I know it's a real shame. There's a lot of kind of slightly clinical words going around here, which is quite right, Sheila, because you are a revered clinician. But maybe can you explain that what you've just said in slightly easier to understand language?
Well, in very simple terms, I would say that someone with an avoidant insecure attachment avoids intimacy or emotional intimacy. Right. Somebody who
can't commit.
In very simple terms,
commitment
yes, I would say.
So like Hugh Grant in 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
Yeah.
There's more complexity to it. And then I would say with ambivalent, it's somebody who can be very, very attached, but then once they're attached, they can't handle it, and then they need to. So there's lots of different ways in which it can apply itself.
So let's get back to George. He moved out of home. He moved from the city to the suburbs, from London to suburbs. His dad was doing really well. He was a restaurateur. He worked his nuts off and managed to go from working class to middle class home area environment. That meant he had to change schools. It must have been the second year, actually, because everybody knew each other. He was the new boy on day one of the second year of secondary school, and walked in, and one of the teachers said, "We've got a new boy. Who would like to look after him?" And Andrew Ridgely found himself putting his hand up and saying, "What about me, miss?" Oh. Which I kind of sensed that she looked at Andrew and went, What you? And he went, yeah. And that was the start of this incredible friendship.
I love it. Wow.
Andrew was really good at football. He was very good looking. He had very, very cool clothes and dress sense, and pretty much all the girls fancied him, from what I can gather. But what he didn't know that George did was about music, and Andrew also loved music, so they shared a really, really good sense of humour, and Andrew loved the fact that George was a walking encyclopedia when it came to pop music. So in terms of what George's image was and what he looked like, and I so identify, a little bit tubby, fluffy hair, and wore glasses, and he puts his little bit tubbiness down to when they were moving. They were having renovations done at the new house, so they had to live above his dad's restaurant. So he kind of went from a really little skinny 11-year-old or whatever to a little sort of podgy 12, 13-year-old. So I guess they were chalk and cheese. Not that I like to refer to children and how they look in that way, but you get it, right? Yeah. So they had a firm friendship. They shared a love of music. Of course, it wasn't long until let's start a band, those kind of conversations started. And I think they went through a couple of iterations, but eventually settled on Wham.
Hooray.
In 1982, they were discovered by young, ambitious Mark Dean, who had had a previous, who was a young A&R guy, you know the type. He'd had a couple of successful bands that he'd signed, and I think it was CBS had given him an imprint label, Innovision. And he was from Bushy as well. And so his first signing to Innovision was Wham. Right. From what I gather, they essentially, when they first got together, they were these three young lads who wanted to conquer the world. Mark wanted to have this. He knew, having listened to 3.5 songs, I think it was half of Careless Whisper on one of the demos, the early demo. Yeah. I think he gave them £500 and, that enabled them to go into the studio. Yeah. And that's what they desperately wanted. And as we know, quickly exploded. George Michael's real name, it was a character that he created, and he talked a lot about it over the years in his career. I guess I just wanted to talk to you guys, and I was really interested in what you thought about this kind of identity issue with the artist as a human being, a person, and who they are and who they understand themselves as being, and then having this incredible talent, which can only be, and was only, for George, I suppose, he couldn't carry it in the vehicle of Yog, so to speak. Yep. He had to create a character in order to carry and deliver this burning ambition and talent and desire to perform and write songs and to give to the world all he had to give. So
hang on, Sam, sorry. You mentioned the vehicle of Yog, which I think is really interesting, and maybe we should call this podcast The Vehicle of Yog. Can you just elaborate on that? Was Yog his nickname?
Yog was his nickname, yeah.
Georgios.
Yogios.
Yeah.
Yogi.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I think it's a soft consonant sound.
Yeah.
I remember George picking up Kirsty Young on Desert Island Discs.
So the identity of George Michael could have been like a protective personality or a protective persona that he developed. Because I guess if somebody's criticising George Michael, then they're not really criticising Yog. So he can kind of separate you from
I didn't really think of that actually. I thought, but you're right. I mean, it's true, isn't it? When you've got when you're using a performance name, there is the ability to hide behind it or see that entity as something that isn't directly you.
Or even allow out parts of your personality that you wouldn't actually, that you would otherwise keep covered.
But I love the image of the vehicle of Yog now. I've just got this idea of this kind of quite normal car that's driving along, and it's just getting more and more and more weight piled on it that it just cannot manage, and it cannot carry until eventually the car like kind of collapses and the wheels come off, and I think that's a really lovely analogy for his life.
It's also interesting as well, isn't it, that if you choose that persona, if you choose, for example, George Michael, because although we're talking about George Michael, we didn't know George Michael. We don't know anybody. Nope. We haven't spoken to anybody about his life. We are just, I don't know, the inference that I've got through being a fan and reading about him. These are my thoughts.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking if he did choose that name, I don't know, age 17, 18, 19 years old, something like that.
Or did Andrew choose it?
No, I think he chose it. But there's something about a sort of transference onto George Michael, the sort of car analogy, if you like, which then takes off and drives into the big lights of London. And it's almost like, where is the 19-year-old Yog left? Does he go in the car with him? Or does he stay at home? In other words, developmentally, is there a freeze that happens if part of you continues into early adulthood, but there's a part of you that doesn't?
Yeah. You mean the arrested development?
I kind of do,
Yeah.
It sounds to me like he's in the back seat. I mean, if you put this in a perspective from a modality that you and I practice called psychosynthesis, you'd say that part of him that was Yog is still with him, but it is still a part of him that probably comes out when he's least wanted.
Well, it's his inner child, isn't it? It's that part of him, and maybe even the wounded part of him, or the part that struggled when he was younger, that he had to cover up in order to become a superstar.
Although it's interesting that, when he talks about George Michael, this sort of entity that he both loves and hates, that he loves for what it's brought him, but he wants to tear it down. But he does feel more authentically Yog. It's almost like he has to put on the leather jacket. He has to put on, he has to have the hair and the makeup and the, get ready, be prepared to step out into the world as George. And like a lot of family, his cousin actually, who he's really close to, Andros, I think his name is, he said it's, he has to step into this character. And you can see there's a total difference.
They did a single together, him and his cousin. It was Jive Talking.
Really?
Yeah, in like the late 80s, early 90s.
Did they?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to play it when I was a mobile DJ.
You were saying that earlier. I didn't know you were a mobile DJ.
I know,
what did you used to wear?
Eh?
What was your outfit?
It was a black tie, bow tie and everything. Yeah, it's like really smart 18th and 21st.
Was it posh parties?
Weddings, very posh parties, yeah. Very posh.
So, Wham, as we know, went absolutely fucking stellar. Massive singles, huge. It just went off really, really quickly. The band soon became a money-making bulldozer. No, it's not right,
Juggernaut.
is it? Juggernaut. Money-making juggernaut. But because of their deal, I don't think that trickled down. I don't think they got any money for any 12-inch. But then I don't think many artists did, actually. Right. Do you remember?
Oh, it was all in the small print.
It was all in the small print. I don't think they got zero royalties for 12-inch. Exactly. Do you remember when there was a load of fucking 12-inch remixes just pumped out left, right, and centre, wasn't there?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's difficult to underestimate how super successful and how successful they got and how quickly it happened. I mean, I think Wham, surprisingly, was 4 years from start to finish.
What, in their entirety?
Yeah. So from being
so
19
quick.
to 23, then it was done.
Yeah.
It's mad,
Felt
isn't
like
it?
longer.
Yeah. It was this lovely quote, actually. I knew at the age of 22 or 23 that I was chasing something that was making me very unhappy.
That's George, is it?
Yeah, he
Wow.
said that to
Wow.
Kirsty Young on the Desert Island Discs.
And when did he say that? When did he do that?
2007.
Okay.
He said that about his 22-year-old self.
Right.
So there was this real kind of sense of, well, it's that story, isn't it? About when George had a conversation with Shirley and Andrew
Right.
on the Club Tropicana video shoot, because I think he was feeling all sort of buoyed and like, maybe it'll be okay for me to come out.
That's when they were at the height of their success, wasn't
Yeah.
it? And it's like it was really, really happening.
Yeah.
And he'd obviously been experimenting with his sexuality, and then this big conversation happened.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And at the time, and it's referenced many times, that it was almost like, you can imagine a bunch of teenagers, can't you? Well, I'm gay. Oh, mate, we love you anyway. It's fine. Yeah, I just really want to tell my mum and dad, oh, don't do that. And there's a real sense that it was really, they were scared of his dad. What's your dad going to say?
Okay.
And they were the conversations that you had
Yeah.
in the late 80s.
Yeah.
But also, to put it absolutely bluntly, I think they were scared of a lot more than his dad. They were scared of what the general public, their fans, the media, they were scared of what everybody else would say. And they were scared that this would somehow or other take away this success that they'd fought so hard for and that they were enjoying so much.
We're going to talk about that in a bit, actually, Matt. But, it's probably interesting to note that their first single came out in 1982. And that is when... that was the start of the AIDS crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the AIDS crisis started in 82, but I don't think actually we heard too much about it until 85.
84, 85.
Yeah, that's what it was. Do you remember those fucking adverts with gravestones going,
Yeah.
don't die of ignorance?
Terrifying.
I was 13 and I remember watching the telly, just coming into my sort of fluttering sexuality and thinking about boys. In fact, I snogged a boy by then. Sorry, Mum. I remember thinking, oh no, that's not fair. How can that be fair?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to have to be really scared, and I don't know if that.
There was definitely a lot of
Do you remember?
fear. Yeah, it was that those campaigns were built on fear, in the hope that it would sort of keep people safe. But I think there was a lot of misunderstanding around.
I think they were in the hope that they were going to control people. It's kind of like, I mean, that's got to go down as one of the worst, most insensitive ad campaigns in the history of ad campaigns. Really, it was just, it caused so much damage.
And it definitely sort of contributed to a bit of a spike in homophobia as well.
Absolutely.
Bit of a spike.
That's what I mean.
Fucking hell. I looked at some of the headlines. Gay plague, lots of religious symbolism about being struck down, about
Sinning.
kind of. Well, if you're going to do that.
Yeah. And what was the reply that George got when he was saying about coming out? How did people respond? What did they say?
What, his friends?
Yeah.
Don't do it.
And was that the end of it? Completely shut down?
I mean, that's what the environment was. If you imagine that he wanted to tell his authentic truth in that horrific environment that we've just described, with all of those ads and everything, it's kind of like, of course, his friends and his colleagues advised him or supported him not to, because they could see what damage it truthfully probably would have done.
Right.
To the brand.
I mean, it's don't tell your dad, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about it'll go mental.
Yeah.
It's about everybody. Nobody said that they'd contracted AIDS at the time because of of what people thought you were outcast.
Yeah.
Your pop career would have been fucked.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yeah.
But also just going back a step, and I wonder, going back to his uncle's suicide. His uncle was gay.
Right.
And he said this, George said this, his mother had always worried about him being gay. Right. And what if he's gay, you know, is he going to be able to cope?
Right. Right.
So it could be that he grew up in a homophobic environment.
I don't think it was I don't think my sense wasn't it was homophobic, other than the fact that I think we're all a bit homophobic then. But more that my brother died of suicide and he was gay. Yeah. I don't want that to happen to my boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds a bit like George might have been carrying some of that pain, some of his uncle's pain, some of that intergenerational trauma and shame that we talk about so often.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he wanted to break it by coming out, and then was advised not to. And I think we should really enforce the fact here that there's not any blame being cast on Andrew or Shirley or the people who might who might have given him that advice.
No, they were kids.
They were just doing what they thought was best at the time.
And we all would have said the same.
Yeah.
At the time. We all would have said the same. 100%.
Yeah.
But that suppression would have been really damaging for his psyche and his emotional health. Really damaging. And then he's got to carry that on top of everything.
So, Wham split up. And that must have been sad. And Andrew and George remained really, really good friends and was forever indebted to Andrew. And that really, really showed when George Michael died, actually, and Andrew did those lovely tributes. Going from Wham through to Faith being released and through into, he went from a teeny, a girl's teen vision that was hugely successful into an absolute fucking global megastar. And that again happened really, really quickly. We all remember that Faith single, and we remember all the supermodels, and we remember the fucking exploding jukebox and the leather jacket. And he was playing a show in South America, and he caught the eye of the most incredible looking guy, so much so he was standing at the side of the stage and George couldn't even look at him because he'd never met him before. He caught his eye and was so drawn to him, and he just thought, oh my God, who's this? He was just embarrassed. He couldn't even go to that side of the stage. And that was Anselmo Filippo, who he fell madly in love with for the first time ever in his whole life. And the horrible thing about that is that I think they were only together for like 6 or 7 months before he got diagnosed.
Right.
And actually the day, I think, or the day after, he performed Somebody to Love at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. So the biggest, for me, the most incredible performance.
Yeah, it was a great performance. I remember that.
It was a really sad time for him. And I feel so sorry for him that he only had that short amount of time to feel all of those in-lovey feelings and for everything to feel like it might be all right with the world.
Yeah.
There's this lovely touching story of sort of vignette, if you like, of George who went back to his mum and dad's for Christmas. And he's kind, when you go back to your mum and dad's and you're kind of doing that thing. And he couldn't tell them that somebody he really, really loved, his boyfriend was, any of that.
No.
Imagine sitting eating your fucking turkey, just feeling sick and fucking heartbroken.
Yeah, and having to hide it all.
And not being able to tell your mum and dad.
It's so lonely. So very lonely.
Going up to your bedroom and just fucking feeling terrible.
Yeah. Back where you're in the house where you're a teenager, where probably a lot of these thoughts and feelings started in the first place.
And you've got no ability to get comforted, even though I'm sure that's what they would have done. Yeah, of course they would. It's just fucking. It's your kid.
Of course,
you don't care, do you?
Yeah.
You don't give a shit. So I thought that was really sad.
Very sad.
George said his life was, my career was amazing, incredible, and nothing ever touched George Michael. But me as a person, I had 2 bereavements and a humiliation. And the second bereavement, of course, was his mum.
Yeah. Right.
And that happened in 1997. About 3 years later, his mother died, and that hit him like a fucking train. You can imagine the grief period would have been back to back, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he had grief there from the moment he was born, and it seems like then he's having all of that to deal with later on. It just would have compounded and been on top of each other.
Born into grief.
Yeah. Finds the love of his life. Or even the death of the band coming out, and then finds the love of his life, loses him.
Yeah.
And then loses his
loss.
mother.
There's a lot of loss, isn't there?
Yeah.
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 I lost my mother about 4.5 years ago, and I phoned a friend to tell him, and he just said, "Mate, this is going to hit you hard. It's the longest conversation of your life," and that phrase really hit me hard.
The day after Anselmo died, he wrote to his mum and dad and told them.
Okay. And how did it go? How did they respond? Do we know?
Fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's the big deal?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there you go. So he'd lost one of the people who accepted him for exactly the person that he was.
Well, this is the point where his addiction started to really grow, didn't it?
Well, here's the thing, Chula. I don't know if it is addiction,
Right.
actually.
I like the cut of your jib.
Because we talk about where does numbing out stop?
Yeah. And when does it become...
Because you've got a really fucking good reason to not be... These feelings are going to kill me if I feel them all right now.
And when does it become an addictive disorder?
When does it become an addiction? Yeah. So I just wondered, do you want to say something about that?
Well, I think it depends on your understanding of what addiction is.
Right.
Because if you look at it from a certain angle, you could say that it's an illness. Addiction is an illness, and you either have it or you don't. But it may get activated, or it may become problematic at different stages in your life. And then people would say that there's no such thing as an illness of addiction, and that it's just a habit that is either in control or out of control to varying degrees. So I think it can be looked at in various different ways. But the important thing to remember is that you can start off doing something recreationally that can become an addictive disorder. And I think that can happen to anyone.
And also that it's important to point out there is physical addiction where you actually get physically dependent on the substance that you're using. And then there's emotional addiction where you are emotionally dependent because you cannot bear the feelings that you're experiencing. So you need to numb them out, as you say, Sam. And then one of the problems with that is that I'm saying this as someone who is recovering from addiction, is that when in active addiction, we tend to behave in ways that then causes more remorse and cause more difficult feelings and emotions that then make us want to numb them out even more.
Yeah. And he definitely had a lot of stuff to be numbing out at that time. So it makes perfect sense. And maybe it wasn't.
So if it couldn't get any worse, it does.
Yeah.
Because then we get into the outed LA toilets sting, actually.
I remember that.
Sting.
By a really good looking fucking copper who went into the loo and what did George say? If he was went into the urinal and the whole thing is, he went into the urinal and he was doing a wee, and George was like, if that's you doing a wee, I'm not going to do the gesture, but if that's what you would do, if that's how you do a wee, you know.
Go on, Sam, do the gesture.
More acrobatics needed.
I just did a gesture,
everyone
everyone listening on audio. So, I mean, what the fuck? It was a sting. He got nicked for engaging in a lewd act.
Isn't there a word for that?
Yes,
Isn't there?
entrapment.
Entrapment.
Yeah, I think it's entrapment.
Sounds
but
like-
in
sounds
any
like
event,
it. Yeah.
in any event, there was a really good-looking copper,
Yeah.
and he was, in self off
Yeah.
in the bog.
Okay.
Sorry,
In plain sight.
And George goes in.
Of course.
Yes,
couldn't resist.
Who wouldn't?
And actually, as George said, no matter what I tried to do, George Michael never, ever, ever, ever suffered. His music, his fans never turned away from him.
No.
There was never one negative thing that happened.
But also, can I just say, as a lifelong George Michael fan, it wasn't a very well-kept secret anyway. I think everybody knew what his sexuality was by then, and nobody gave a fuck.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
I was more shocked by the way in which people were so, willing to demonise him or try to, attempt to. It was awful.
Yeah. And in a way, this whole kind of empathy for the devil title, we talked about it a lot, didn't we? And it's this whole kind of, vilification, deification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do feel that what we're trying to do is to get to the human being behind it.
Absolutely. 100%.
And following his arrest, and what I love about George, and it's so fucking suburbs, he was just like, fuck it, we're going out for dinner. And that night, got all dressed up, went out with Kenny. And
brilliant.
And
who was Kenny?
His boyfriend. And they went and had dinner at a really sort of flash restaurant. And then the next day or the day after, he went on to American News broadcaster and just went, yeah, I'm a gay man. After that happened, there was some albums released. There was some Outside was released.
Some great videos. Let's talk about the video.
Oh,
because what a genius.
Hell.
Only George Michael could have taken what happened to him and recreate it into something so fucking magical.
Let's go outside.
Wonderful.
Yeah, brilliant.
And the title of his greatest hits, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And it's funny actually because Ollie from Years and Years paved the way for queerness to be okay in pop. You know, and I think that is a huge legacy to leave. And in many respects is you can imagine, you know, George, you know, he was on Parky, wasn't he? And he went, yeah, you know, I'm a gay man. Yeah, gay man go out cruising. Yeah, that's just, can everyone just fucking calm the fuck down? You know, this is, you know.
It's just life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't back down is, I really admire that about him.
100%. Yep.
And look what he did for the generations to come. It's such a shame he can't see that.
I
Hopefully
know,
he knows.
Yeah. I hope he did know. And I hope he does know somewhere.
Yeah.
Up there, 100%.
Yeah. So after that, there were albums, like I say, some incredible performances. But there definitely was a sense that there was the numbing out behaviour that was carrying on. George did say in the Desert Island Disc interview that he got nicked for misuse of sleeping pills.
Right.
But I think he's also said that he loved a bit of weed.
Yes, I'd heard that.
And in fact, Kirsty says to him, do you think you've got a problem with weed? And he was, I must admit, I kind of detected a little bit of defensiveness, a little tiny bit. I felt like there was a little bit of, he replied by saying, well, I can afford it and it doesn't affect my career.
Well, of course you'd have said that. I mean, I used to say that. I mean, anybody who's ever had an issue with substances and somebody asks them about it, they're going to get really defensive. It's like, it's the first thing you're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so of course he's going to do that. But do you remember he was asleep at the wheel. He was found at a red light asleep at the wheel in his car.
Yes,
at one stage. So there was definitely stuff going on.
Well, put it this way: if I had a mate who'd driven into fucking Snappy Snaps and had been done for possession and fallen asleep at the wheel, I would be saying, dude,
something's going.
Are you all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You would, any of your friends, you would think something's not right there, wouldn't you?
But he did go to a treatment centre, didn't he?
Yeah,
yes,
he did.
It's quite well documented that he did, and it didn't quite catch.
No.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a quote, I think you sent it to me, and it's like, weirdly, it's from Elton John via Ozzy Osbourne, saying that, you know, George was just one of the people who didn't want it, as in talking about recovery from addiction. Maybe it's something that we could talk about, because it's, did he understand that he had a problem? Did he know that he had a problem? Did he accept that he had a problem, if he had a problem? I don't buy into the philosophy that there are some people who can't be helped.
Yeah.
I believe that everybody can be helped at the right time. And I think it's a tragedy that George Michael died before maybe he had that moment when he realized that he needed help. Because, you know, we all know we've sent enough people to rehab who then have come out and decided they don't want to live the life that's on offer in recovery, and they've relapsed. So we know that, but we equally know that everybody has their time to find a lasting high quality recovery.
But there's also lots of people who aren't given the right kind of guidance when they need it, or even worse, given the wrong kind of guidance and sent to facilities that, well, obviously it's a matter of opinion, but don't really give them what they need, and therefore the treatment isn't successful. And I think that's something that we could debate till the cows come home. And there's different ways of looking at what's good treatment, what's bad treatment. But I guess the good thing about the way we work is that we work collectively. So it's not any one of us making the decision about, oh, this person should go there or have this kind of treatment. We discuss it together as a team, and we bring all of our experience and knowledge together to try and get what's best for that individual.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're rigid either. I don't think that we stick to sort of a one size fits all. We try and really understand the individual and then tailor the treatment to suit them.
I think overall, what's good for people to know is that rehabs aren't all the same.
No.
Yeah.
You know,
No.
they can vary wildly.
And also the person has to be ready,
Yes.
you know. And if you're going to shut someone up, you're probably not ready.
No.
Yeah.
Sadly, as we know, in 2016 on Christmas Day,
Was it Christmas Day?
he died.
Devastating.
Of a heart attack in his home in Oxfordshire. Sad.
I didn't know.
I remember listening to that. I remember turning on the radio, going, "Oh, Christmas morning, blah blah blah, da 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 da." Oh, what? Massive floral tributes at his home in Hampstead. I think we were all devastated, weren't we?
He got his Christmas #1.
Did he?
Yeah.
What that?
Last Christmas, because of digital, it went straight to #1.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
because he was secretly a bit pissed off when Band-Aid got to #1,
He
wasn't he?
was, wasn't he? Bless him. But he was able to talk about it. We're talking about the documentary that's on Netflix, I think, Andrew Ridgeley's documentary.
Which is brilliant.
And George himself tells the story about how he was a little bit pissed off when Band-Aid beat Last Christmas #1.
Yeah. But it was too polite to say.
Exactly. But bless him for saying it and owning it. Fucking hell.
Yeah. It's brilliant, isn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, when we're sort of concluding and summing up and thinking about it, I guess what I was thinking, if it was addiction in the way that we're describing, if he took himself up to that rehab, for example, because he thought, well, maybe I am. I guess I was wondering if because George Michael didn't go down in flames because of his using. Did he not hit rock bottom?
I tell you what, I heard someone in an AA meeting talk about that they were able to keep buying themselves more chaos because they never had a rock bottom because of their financial situation.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I see a lot, is because there are no real dire consequences that you don't actually have to do it in order to either save your life or save your career or save your home or whatever it is. So there is potentially that argument.
Funny you should say that, Matt. There's a lovely quote. I suffer as a person like crazy, bereavement and public humiliation. But my career has always seemed to right itself, like a duck in a bath. In some ways, I resent that.
Okay. Yeah.
It's interesting. That's quite a negative, or I mean, that's quite a very sad interpretation of his story, because I always look at him as being someone who really persevered and despite all the odds just fought against it and kept going, and his talent and success really rose up despite everything that was going on. But I guess maybe that's how he felt inside.
I was thinking maybe he was trying to kill him off. George Michael, was he trying, the self-destruction? And then of course, and what made me laugh a little bit was the addicts, I'm shit, I'm it, because then you get this bit. I had a feeling I had a huge advantage over the other people in the music industry. I'd spent much of the last 15 to 20 years trying to derail it, but I knew my talent would never let me down. You sort of get that little whiff of confidence, yes, but that little bit of untouchable.
Yeah.
You can't touch me.
Yeah.
And the problem with that, with addiction, is that might be the...
Well, that's the thing that blocks surrender, doesn't it? Blocks people sort of surrendering and saying, I'm in a mess, I can't do this anymore. But
going back to the myth thing that we were talking about before, it's like Icarus. He, the flight of Icarus, who thinks he's untouchable, and he flies too close to the sun, and actually his whole flying costume is made of wax, so it melts and he comes tumbling down to earth. And I think with some people, they come tumbling down to earth and they get caught and they get supported and they get helped. But with other people, when they come tumbling down to earth, that's it. That's the end, and they die.
Yeah.
I remember, as you know, drugs and alcohol aren't my go-to using things. codependency.
Yeah.
I remember coming home from work one day in my late 20s, and I could barely deal with being on the tube. I was so anxious, and I remember getting into my flat and shutting the door, and I remember just throwing myself onto the ground and just saying, because I'd been to a couple of like coda meetings,
Right.
and I remember saying, if you're a real God, you've got to save me now, because I can't bear it. I just thought, I can't fucking live another day like this. I can't live another day like this. I can't feel like this anymore. I'm fucking sick of it. And it's almost like to ask this sort of entity that you've got no idea even fucking exists, and you feel like a bit of a saying it. I've used the very bad words there. You know, how bad do you have to be
Yeah.
to basically ask Father Christmas to come and save you? And you fucking mean it. So when you say there's a gap between, you know, if that, anything that gets in the way of that surrender, anything gets in the way of that desperation is going to, I mean, from that day on, my life just improved. Literally from the very moment I said it, that very moment of surrender, it got better, and I'm so glad it did.
And it's known as the gift of desperation, which might sound corny, but it's actually really true.
Yeah.
Because until you really feel that moment that you're describing, it's very difficult to have the wherewithal to follow through and get into recovery.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to see somebody and work with somebody who's stuck on that runaway train, and you're just thinking, just get off, and they just
surrender.
They can't for whatever reason.
They can't. No, it's like taking a leap of faith, isn't it?
Yeah,
you don't know if there's anything that's going to catch you.
So actually, I don't think it's that George didn't want to. I think it's that he couldn't, and that he desperately wanted to. And his behaviour shows us time and time again that he was trying, and actually he never succeeded because he was just too fucking talented.
Despite all the adversity and the grief and the humiliation and all the other shitty things that went on in his life, he over and over and over again used his stardom for good into supporting HIV charities. Obviously, there's numerous accounts of the money that he left or gave away.
His generosity.
What was it? NHS, nurses,
it's legendary.
Causes. And that's just such a lovely, beautiful thing. And I guess it reminds us that no amount of money or fame can protect us really from the human experience.
Let's light a candle for George.
Can light a candle for George. This is for you, mate. What I would like to do is to leave our lovely George Michael in our memory, in our collective memory. Maybe, I think, on stage at 27, which I think he was, in South America. And he's singing, I don't know, I want your sex or something, I don't know. And he looks over to the side of the stage and sees a lovely, handsome man looking back at him. And and their eyes meet, and there's a little bit of something going on. And his heart skips a beat. And I kind of just want to leave him there with all that potential, with all of that what could be. And thanks for listening, guys.
Well, thanks for telling the story.
Yeah.
You've held him really well.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to end actually with one of the lyrics from My Mother Had a Brother.
Right.
And this is really nice. I swear now that freedom is here, and I'm going to taste it all for you, boy.
Wow.
And I guess in my mind, he's thinking about his uncle. And he did. He did taste all of it.
He really did.
Yeah.
Wow. Here's to you, George.
Here's to you, George.
One for the road, Sam?
Yes, One for the Road. The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. What I really like about this is the idea that an artist, a creative person, or indeed any kind of human being, can see their creativity as being something spiritual, something divine, something that they are able to receive, something that is theirs, something that has been gifted to them and that is special to them and unique to them. And I kind of like the fact that it's personal, it's private, it's like having a relationship with God, however you choose to understand God. And I kind of like the fact that it belongs to you and can't be taken away. And I really like that as a counterpoint to the idea of the rock star, you know, that kind of, I don't know, that vehicle, which doesn't serve the soul. And I really like what Rick says. I think it serves the soul.
Thanks so much for listening.
We'll be back soon when we'll be tackling the story of Kurt Cobain, one of the most famous archetypal stories when it comes to a musician battling addiction and depression within the spotlight.
See you all then.